new economic partnership between the U.S. and U.K. President Biden says there is no closer ally than Britain. He welcomed UK Prime Minister Sunak to the Oval Office on Thursday. Nathan King reports from the White House.
Well, they've come a long way in the last 4 months. This closest, perhaps, of transatlantic relationships went from US President Joe Biden not knowing how to pronounce Prime Minister Sunak's name to now meeting 4 times in the last few months. And outwardly, of course, Britain likes to hear the word special relationship when it comes to the US and UK, and they weren't disappointed. Let's take a listen.
Today, as NATO allies, partners in innovation, as friends in a shared vision of the future, and our two nations are ready to meet the challenges of our time and meet them together. And I'm confident the United Kingdom and the United States will continue to lead the world toward greater peace, prosperity, and security for all.
I know some people have wondered what kind of partner Britain would be after we left the EU. I'd say, judge us by our actions. We're committed to our values as ever, as reliable an ally as ever, as attractive an investment destination as ever. But we're changing too. We're strengthening our relationships, not just with old friends like America and in Europe, but with new friends in the Indo-Pacific too.
The two countries also announcing an economic plan called the Atlantic Declaration. It's very much like the supply chain questions that the US has had about industries of the future when it comes to semiconductors in Asia, and it's essentially a cut and paste job for the UK, also giving them access to subsidies for green technology here in the US, which have been one major sticking point, as it had with European allies. But this is not the free trade agreement that the UK has wanted for a long time when it comes to the US since it exited the European Union. And even on Ukraine, where they seem to be united, UK has been really much pushing behind the scenes Washington to supply more, to actually supply more advanced weapons. Even though they said they'd be there forever, there is still a big question between London and Washington as when they will embrace any peace initiative. When it comes to other aspects, pretty much on the same page, although Joe Biden used the opportunity to take a real swipe at the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Let me just read you what he said. The Chinese have a Belt and Road Initiative. That Belt and Road Initiative turns out to be a debt and confiscation program, not going very far. Well, I don't have to tell you, there are lots of studies out there, even by Western studies, that basically say that is not true. It is not a debt trap. It's investment that a lot of countries badly need. But it's interesting that the US would use this standing next to the UK Prime Minister. And Biden talked to their own Belt and Road Initiative, potentially building a railway from the Atlantic all the way through to the Indian Ocean. Well, we'll see. What was interesting about Rishi Sunak is he said that security was indivisible, not just when it came to Ukraine. He said basically what happens at the Atlantic Europe also reflects on the Indo-Pacific, suggesting a worldview perhaps beyond the UK's capabilities. Nathan King, CGTN for the White House.
For more on the US-UK ties, Remi Piet, the senior partner at Emily Advisory. Good to have you on. Let's start where Nathan left off, I guess, which is he talked about Belt and Road. Is this the beginning of a different type of Belt and Road? But most of us here already knew that the relations between the UK and the US were fairly close already. Where does this take us in terms of the next step?
No, I mean, you're talking here about a very close relationship, obviously, between the US and UK. They've been diplomatic relations since 1812, very strong alliance and partnership between the two, and obviously kind of one of the backbone of the international orders across 19th century and 20th century. And obviously the newcomers here is in China over the last few decades or years. And that's probably why there was some narrative about the Belt and Road Initiative as opposed to the traditional historical alliance between the US and the UK. Now, we actually, and I think that the person just before made a very good point, we're actually far from the kind of trade agreements that the Brexiter and Rishi Sunak were pushing for in 2019 and the years beyond. But that agreement between between the US and the UK is still very interesting to look at on a series of different dimensions, especially critical minerals with a series of incentives saying clean energy cars, heavy metals cars. Manufacturers in the UK will classify for fiscal breaks in the US as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, agreements on the defense front, and also on data exchanges and
right. Remi, those are pre-existing, positives. Granted that were already previously announced. I think what Nathan was referring to is he seemed to think that there could have been a declaration of a true free trade agreement similar to like the North American Free Trade Agreement, and some are saying that had that happened, that would be much more substantial, more than just friendly words. Are you surprised, or were you expecting something more?
No, I mean, it's and even Richie Sunak himself was saying that in terms of agreeing onto a trade agreement, the world has changed. It's more focused on specific sectors and not into large scale, trade agreements that were unfortunately, I mean, actually pushed by the Brexiter in as part of their campaign. But it would be extremely hard to see a same kind of large scale agreements that we've seen over the 2010s, for example. Now we're actually more focused on a series of alliances, and here clearly it is on elements such as defense. With the capacity to bid for a series of contracts in Washington, D.C. that is linked to the current conflict in Ukraine, and also, as I said, critical minerals and collaboration on renewable
the Prime Minister, post-Brexit, has had his share of pressure as well, right? The UK economy isn't exactly doing fantastic, albeit the market is, but they also have an inflationary problem as well, and he's got pressures at home. Is part of this political as well as that, say, look, we're gonna improve our relations with the US or expand our relations with the US? I mean, how does that help them, I guess, over the UK, fix their inflation problem or fix their economic problem?
I mean, it's true. I mean, you're looking here, we have to look at, different sectors of the economies of the UK. I mean, obviously not, some very glorious numbers as opposed to some of the neighbors. France has been kind of attracting most of the investment in Western in Europe over the last few years, and a little bit Germany behind. Brexit has hurt. But if you're looking at, kind of the strategy from Richie Sunak here is to push towards collaboration on, large scale industries, whether it is, car manufacturing, which is a traditional historical, sector in the UK to some extent, and also the defense industry, and trying to foster some agreements between Washington and London at the governmental level for a series of tax breaks that would be shared under the Inflation Reduction Act if you have cars manufactured or heavy metals manufactured in the UK, and same thing about being able to bid on defense industry. Right. So yes, it's not going to be as effective as a large scale, for everyday citizen, trade agreements on common goods, for example, but at least, it's a small step.
Remi, it was also noticeable that we didn't see any specific announcement with respect to Ukraine. There's been some criticism that the UK is providing sort of tanks and training. I know F-16s were brought up, whether or not there would be something like that. And the UK is providing longer range missiles to, the UK is providing longer range missiles to the Ukrainian military. And there's been some criticism that the US could do more from that perspective. When it comes to missiles and planes. Was that discussed, and what is the reluctance at this point? Or maybe there was something discussed that was positive that did not announce?
So I mean, there were things that were discussed in terms of communication. There's actually a kind of an agreement, between Ukraine and its allies not to talk too much about those issues currently, specifically for tactical reasons and others. But when you look at support from the US and the UK to Ukraine, yes, there's current debate. There was some in Washington D.C. and Richie Sunak actually took part of trying to explain the importance of the support from the US industries to Ukraine by visiting Congress, by talking to a series of Republican and Democratic representative of Congress and senators, and trying to reaffirm the support from the U.S. to Ukraine that should be even beyond a potential counter, attack on the ground.
Remi, really appreciate your analysis on this. I guess the bottom line is the U.S. and the U.K. are close friends, and there's more to come. Appreciate you. Thank you.